What's up, everybody? I'm DomofX. Welcome back to my channel. I am the comicreleases.com editor and near mint condition project manager. But today we got the second episode of Two Californian Filipinos, and once again, Drew Morgan is joining me. So thank you for being the co-host again for second straight week.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to be here. I had a lot of fun last week. I didn't realize how much I love talking about movies, even if I generally didn't like them. So that was really fun. Although a little bit of a tone shift, I think, for this episode. So I won't spoil any more, but I'll pass it back to you.
I know, man. So we were talking about Star Wars, the first episode, the unspecialized, un-George Lucas, completely filtered cut that came out in 1977. And shout out to my one former friend who had all of these cool things in his Google Drive folder. Unfortunately, I couldn't watch it anymore from that, but we were able to find it here on this specific episode, and we got to watch it. And man, this was a complete trip, and we got a full loaded packed episode of just talking about all the stuff that we loved in this movie and everything else of the sort. Like, it's magical stuff.
Yeah, and you already kind of talked about it, but the un-George Lucas sort of edition, right? If you are like me, I mean, I'm 30 years old, and so I grew up watching these on VHS, and I don't remember the first time that I saw Star Wars, but I remember like it being on VHS, and then I remember when it came out on DVD, and they added all these special effects and like scenes that weren't in the original film, and I was like very confused by that. And so before we get into the episode, I do want to give a shout out to Harmy's Star Wars Trilogy Despecialized Edition. We watched the Star Wars, the original movie, from Harmy's Star Wars Despecialized Edition. If you are interested in that, you can probably Google that and find the information, but can't thank them enough because this fan edit was amazing. I read a little bit into the kind of work that they had to do. They basically had to like kind of like frame by frame do this, and that's just a lot of work. The movie, as you saw, Dom, is 20 gigabytes, which is not the normal size of a movie, but it was worth it. It was worth all that downloading. It was worth figuring out how to do it, and I loved every minute of it. And I just wanted to shout them out before we actually started talking about the movie.
I completely agree with you. And for me, like, I couldn't get it working for whatever reason on my laptop, which is why I had to reach out to you to get it, but I was still able to watch it, still able to just unwind on a Sunday night where my Achilles just sort of continued to flame itself up. But I was like, man, I'm just gonna go watch some Star Wars tonight. Like, the download link, hopefully it works. Watched all 2 hours and 1 minute of it, because I haven't watched the credits because I love listening to John Williams' soundtrack and to all the amazing people who obviously worked and labored through that movie and the hardships that they had to face. So it's a big ode to all of them just for getting this film along in, and part of, again, why do we love Star Wars. I think that's part of it, right? Like the labor, the intense work, and everything crafted so that we could get a amazing product out
And start the social phenomena of like the last 5 decades almost, in 3 years it'll be 5 decades. So yeah, it's funny you say that. I watched the entire credit sequence too. Like I watched the whole thing up until, because it's the fan edit specialized despecialized edition, up until they started thinking like what I believe to be their Patreon supporters or whoever supported them and stuff like that. I watched the full like original movie credits, and yeah, no, I agree. It is like a piece of like cinema history, I feel like. And I have some sort of like analysis that I'll be applying to later, I think, on the second thing that we're going to be talking about. So I don't want to spoil that. But how do you want to start talking about this first part that we're talking about?
What do we love Star Wars? What is the reason that we keep going back? What's the reason that you keep going back to Star Wars, even if sometimes things muck up or just happen to flounder?
Yeah, I think eventually we'll talk about kind of, maybe in a much later episode, we'll talk about the newer Star Wars stuff that's been coming out. But for me, what made me love Star Wars, and it has been my favorite series since I was a little kid. Like I said, since before I could remember. Spoiler alert if you've never seen Empire Strikes Back, but there's a reveal in there where the like one of the primary antagonists is Luke's father, right? And I don't even have the memory of finding out that Darth Vader was Luke's father. So I don't know what my reaction was. That was like knowledge that I feel like I was born with because I don't remember ever seeing that for the first time. So that's really interesting to me. But yeah, so Star Wars has been a huge part of my life pretty much the entire time I've been alive, since I can remember. But I love the sort of magic elements, and I'm a huge science fiction fan, and one of my favorite science fiction shows recently has been The Expanse, which is finished and wrapped up at least for 6 seasons. But that's very different than Star Wars. Like Star Wars is futuristic, but there's obviously magic elements in it, and there's the chosen one destiny and stuff, which isn't sort of, I don't know, mate. I feel like it's not normal for science fiction because generally science fiction you're thinking like, oh, this is technology and all this is doing things, but in Star Wars it's like it's magic. It is space magic. That's what it is. And rewatching this version, it kind of made me realize a lot of the things that made Star Wars so special to me, from like classic characters. And I love the okay, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but so we'll just saying like I do love the characters from the first film. The plot is it's like very tight. There's not like wasted things going on in this movie, which kind of happens a lot in newer films, especially again, the newer Star Wars media. There's like wasted time. And so while the runtime is 2 hours and 1 minute or whatever it was, like you said earlier, it felt like every second mattered, which is super interesting. And just I haven't watched a movie like this in a really long time because it does feel like a lot of movies have like wasted stuff in them these days, and I'd have to have a little bit of a deeper analysis to kind of look in on that. But yeah, I don't know, I love the characters, love the plot. The special effects are obviously revolutionary for its time. There's not much I don't like about this movie, and honestly, like I think that's kind of what makes it so special to me. But also, again, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, huge science fiction fan, so the first film is always going to hold a special place in my heart.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, this is like, at least for me, because my first movie was Empire Strikes Back. I think what pushed me to Star Wars was like all of my friends, like they had these super cool big Lego sets that I didn't have because I was into like different Legos. I just didn't know what Star Wars was. So we all started like playing it on the playground and stuff, and my friend has like this Chewbacca and Han Solo figures. I'm like, what is that like looks weird but super cool? It's like, that's Star Wars. I'm like, I've never watched Star Wars, and I was in like first grade then, and I just started getting persecuted like for not being able to like, or not watching it at all in general, because I was like the oft weirdo who was just sort of like out of tune with everything. But then family came over from Britain, and they told me Star Wars is really good, and we found like episode 5 streaming on, I think it was Spike. I think it was Spike or TNT that aired it, and I was like, man, I'm gonna go watch this tonight. And I watched it. I was like, man, this is magical. This feels like I'm part of a different world, and I'm experiencing all of the weird trials and tribulations that these characters are going to. And I didn't know who the heck like Darth Vader was or anything at all. So when that twist happens, it hit me super hard. I was like, there's no way. But what keeps me going back to Star Wars is the whole Yoda talks about the Force scene in episode 5, where he just goes on this amazing dialogue about this is what the Force is, it's how it works, it's why like I'm super powerful and it lives through all human beings and all that. It's such a beautiful thing. Like the world building and the atmosphere, it just feels so different from everything else. It's just why I keep going back to it. I don't think there's anything else that keeps me involved besides like it's like I'm in a far off land that I want to stay in and be in.
Yeah, I like the word atmosphere when you describe it. I think man, I think that's something that I would say is kind of missing from especially the new trilogy, right? Like I don't know, everything just feels not real, but more authentic in this film. I mean, maybe it's also because we watched the despecialized version, which I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's also, like it's HD, but it's still got like the grainy look. One of the things that I didn't really remember them as a kid, but as I got older, I started paying attention more to like transitions. And Star Wars is, famous for the side swipe transition or the up to horizontal transition, or like sometimes they do like a diagonal one. And I remember that a lot from the prequel trilogy when that came out, but like my baseline knowledge of films when I was like even younger watching these movies as the original trilogy as a kid, I didn't remember it. And then when I rewatched it on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever it was later, I was like, oh yeah, I do see those transitions. I was like, did they add that like later? But I'm watching the despecialized ones, I see, oh, I realized that in this despecialized version or like the original version, the transitions, they don't stand out like a sore thumb. They fit. Everything in Star Wars fits. But when you try to add that into like the newer films, it looks like, I don't know, a film student's project because it just doesn't work as well. And I think there's something about like you said, the atmosphere of Star Wars fitting really well with the technology that it was made with. And I don't know, I think that's really cool. Like the storytelling and the technology. I think there's like a sort of marriage between what it is and the era that it was made in that makes it so special, and makes it fit so well. Because if the Star Wars original film that we watched was made today, frame for frame, shot for shot, people would be like, what is this fight scene? This is silly as hell. Like, like why and so it looks like I said, like a student's film or something like that. That's what it would look like. But I think it all just works so well.
It does. And that's why
Yeah.
I hate the brand new editions, just me remembering all of the stuff that they added on top of it. Like, watching the first or whatever the cut is that Disney Plus on all of these aired movies show, it's like I see Jabba the Hutt and like he's walking around talking to Han. I'm like, did we really need that in the movie? I don't think we needed that in the. It just looks so out of place.
Yeah, no, that's the great thing about the original film is that you like it builds lore without like needing to like put it in your face, right? And I actually saw this about the prequel trilogy. One of the main complaints is that obviously George Lucas, because he had complete creative control over it and no one was saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. He did a lot of things that like were basically just over expositioning over expository or what, I don't know what the word is, but it was, instead of like saying this thing happened, he'd have to show like this elaborate scene of the thing happening. And the one of the only times that doesn't happen in the prequel trilogy is when Palpatine is sitting next to Anakin in Episode 3, and he starts talking about the legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise, right? And that's one of the, and it's a meme, obviously, like
Right.
become a meme these days, but it's kind of cool world building where you're like, oh, let me tell you about this thing that you don't know if I'm telling the truth, you don't know when exactly this happened, and it's kind of like in this scene, this happens, or in this movie specifically, it happens a bunch, right? Obi-Wan just casually mentions the Clone Wars, um casually mentions being a Jedi Knight, and because we don't know about the ranking systems here, we don't know about a Padawan and Master and Knight in this movie, we don't know about the clones or Clone Wars. When they enter the cantina and the bartender's like, we don't serve your kind here, the droids, they'll have to wait outside, like we're like, why, like what the hell, like what's going on here, like that's interesting world building that happens, and we're just like, oh, for some reason this is the case, right? And this is all in the first like 40 minutes of the movie, like this is before they leave Tatooine, I'm talking about. And but in the prequel trilogy, it's everything is like over explained. It's like, oh, like there's no like mystery behind anything. They even try to explain what the Force is with like mitochondria and whatever. And so I think this movie does that really well. And it builds this universe without showing every little thing about it. And I think that's really cool. Done really well.
I agree. And you just like listen to like Obi-Wan talk about all the stuff that's happened to him, and you're always curious about what he's actually talking about. You're never at a point in your seat where you're bored. You are always, what's the next thing that's going to happen? Like, even on from the beginning, I remember I sent a message out to a friend, say, like, I quoted Shakespeare. I was like, brevity is the soul of wit, Shakespeare from sometime in the 1500s. And like that opening scene, right, where you have the crawl of the rebels fighting the Empire, you know exactly what's going on without a word being told, which is super cool. Like, you compare that to Phantom Menace, where it's just a bunch of boring dialogue for the first 5 minutes about some stupid trade route. But like, you look at like what they did in the original Star Wars, you're like, okay, this is all concise. I'm being fed information, but it's never to the point where I'm being overloaded with information at any point in the movie.
Yeah, there's not useless politics, which was one of the downfalls, I think, of the prequel trilogies. There was like some politics is fine. Like in this film, they talk about the, Palpatine, Chancellor, or what do they call him, the Emperor? They talk about the Emperor dissolving the Senate. So there's some politics involved, and the guy's like, well, how's he gonna, how are we gonna keep the outer planets in line? And Grand Moff Tarkin's like, the regional governors have blah 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 blah. They're in the fear of this battle station. You know what I mean? And yeah, there's just man, yeah, you're right about the brevity thing. But even the characters when they talk, right? They don't over explain things. Like look at like when Obi-Wan is when they're like hiding and Han Solo calls. They're hiding under the panels of the Millennium Falcon, and Han Solo says something like oh, this old man, this fool of an old man or whatever. And then Obi-Wan's just like, who's the more fool, the fool or the fool who follows him? And then he just goes and does his thing. And I'm like, yeah, he's right. Like
completely right. And just like, even like all the characters in this movie too, I think Grand Moff Tarkin is one of the most undersung villains ever in Star Wars. I don't think anyone talks about like his demeanor, but he ended up being oddly like one of my favorite characters to watch in this movie. Because like at no point is he's always resolute in whatever he believes in. He never ever like falters in any form, but you always understand like why he's doing it. It's like, yeah, the guy just wants to see all the plans laid out. A lot of other Star Wars media and films have sort of built up on it as like, yeah, this is what he's always been. Like if we watch the Clone Wars someday, you're going to see like Tarkin has been like this the whole time, but he is awesome in this movie. Like when he's talking with Princess Leia, when he's talking with the other admirals and commanders in the Bay of the Death Star, he is awesome like as a Star Wars villain. I feel like just because of everything else in this movie that is amazing, I feel like he gets kind of overshadowed with everyone else.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was. I'd absolutely agree. Rewatching it, I have a greater appreciation, especially as an adult. But like when you see him, like you said, interacting with Leia, and she's like, "Oh, it's on Dantooine," and then because she's like, he's like, "We're about to destroy your home planet," and then she gives up this random planet that is old or whatever, and he just goes, "Thank you for the information. All right, you may fire when ready." And I was like, dang, he is cold-blooded, dude. Like, he is not playing any games. But you're right. Like, he is resolute in his decision-making. And I think, we're getting a little bit into character analysis, so we'll kind of save some of it. But yeah, he was awesome. And you just like everything about him, I was like, oh yeah, he's really cool. And I think the sort of like dual antagonists behind, there's Darth Vader, who is in this film very much like the muscle, right? And then you have Grand Moff Tarkin, who is very much just like this sort of like you said, resolute leader, I guess we could just say, before we get into like character analysis type stuff. But yeah,
for sure,
fantastic, loved it.
I just wish that, again, like all of these brand, like all of the remastering could just be like mopped away, so people at least get some of a chance to see what the old things look like. But like for someone like, for example, my brother is still in high school. He's never watched the original Star Wars movie, and he might never get to see it just because of all the muck that they've put on. Like, I'm thinking about, obviously, people bring up this scene with Han and Greedo all the time, and I think it's such an important scene because you get to see what Han's character is like, but you won't see that just because we've messed up that scene to the point where it's like, okay, who shot first? Like, I don't think any of even the newer guys know.
Yeah, I actually, because we talked about this beforehand, I paid close attention to that scene, and this is what I loved about the remastered version, because, or not, sorry, the demastered version or the despecialized edition or whatever this one's called, right? Is that it's how it is in the original film when it's like it's kind of close to the theatrical version of it, where you don't even see Greedo really shoot. You know, all of us, you hear the shot and you see like the commotion, but you don't see who shot until obviously Greedo's dead and Han has his. You see him unbuckling it, unholstering his gun, but you don't actually see him pull it out and shoot like a gunslinger, right? It's, and I think the movie making is so well, like the movie making process of this part is so well done because yeah, like this is another of those things where like they could easily show Han unholstering his gun, pulling it out and shooting it, right? But instead, the way that it's done is it's so fast that the audience doesn't even get to see it. And I think that is way cooler than showing every single little thing. And I know like in storytelling, like when we're reading books and stuff, like if you ever, you know, taken an English class over the last 20 years, they'll say show, don't tell. And the thing is like that while that's true in a book where you want to like show things, right? And like you don't want to like over explain everything. In a movie, the over explanation is what the remastered versions have, where they show Greedo and Han shooting for some reason when it's totally unnecessary. And so the storytelling of the original is objectively better for that reason because it is showing us how fast Han Solo is, how quick he is to pull his gun out and make decisions and be like, well, I'm not dying in this cantina. You know, like he's truly like, at least in the beginning of A New Hope or, you know, Star Wars, he is like, he's just out for himself. Like he's just trying to make a living. So I really enjoyed that scene in the version that we watched.
All right, and I think that's a perfect opportunity to get into all the amazing characters that this movie has because literally not one of these characters is one-dimensional. Like everyone has depth, and like yeah, with Han Solo in his case, I can tell he's a rogue, he's a scoundrel, he's selfish, but underneath all of that, all of those layers is a heart of gold, right? We see at the end where he saves Luke from the imminent destruction of the TIE fighters led by Darth Vader. He cares that he made a friend and wants to see it all work out in the end. And I thought, man, like that's a great scene. And you know, we talk about Luke destroying the Death Star, which is cool, but you get that added on character arc for Han, which is in itself like a pretty spectacular thing to see for him.
Yeah, I agree. I like the character development of Han. Something that I think is really well done again is the storytelling is, and I looked because I was like, man, like I've been watching this movie for a while, and we're not even like at Han Solo yet. Like he doesn't appear in the film until like 40 minutes in or something like that. Like he appears at like the end of the first act, you know, and that's, I don't know, like it's a long first act, but I was like, oh, that's really cool. It just seems like I said, no time is wasted, right? Because if they introduce someone like Han in the very beginning, then you're kind of just like, okay, so we have to do like this sort of origin story or introduction for him, while instead our introduction is Luke and Obi-Wan's introduction to him, which I thought was really cool. And again, yeah, like you said, like everything is, oh, what about the money? I'm doing this for me. And Luke can't even get Han to save Leia until he's just like, there'll be a reward. It's like, you know, money, she's a princess, she's wealthy, powerful, blah, blah, blah. And even up until they leave for the Death Star is still like, yeah, but what good's a reward if you're not around to spend it? And then you get to see like, you know, like you said, his character arc, his character development, because so like up until that point in the movie, it's all about him, maybe Chewie. And at the end, he is totally making a selfless act and obviously being rewarded for it afterwards because he receives like an award and stuff like that. And
I think even like during the middle, he mentions like he got the money. He told Luke that he got it right, and Luke's just like, yeah, you should come stay and fight. Like we need to destroy this thing. And he said like, I need to like look out like after myself. I don't want to die. So getting to see that 180 quick is again, a pretty cool thing for him. Like that's why I think a lot of people love Han Solo, right? Like he's gritzy, but the guy's a good guy. Like out in the end, it's just that he has different morals than everyone else, and that's something you can like. The difference between him and everyone else is noticeable, but it's a good noticeable.
I agree. I think there's like his sort of ethos is like this rugged individualist guy. You know what I mean? He's like a worker. He's kind of like outside the law. You know what I mean? Like this weird kind of like outsider guy. Because he's a smuggler. But then like, and even like if we go back to the when he's talking to or when Luke is training in the Millennium Falcon with the lightsaber and the little droid flying thing, and they're talking about like the Force and all this stuff, and he's kind of like almost mocking it, right? He's just like, look, man, I've been to from one side of the galaxy to another, and I've never seen anything that makes me believe in blah 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 blah. And none of this is a match for a good blaster. No religion, no ancient weapon or whatever. And I kind of like that, right? Like it's obviously in contrast to Obi-Wan very specifically, because Obi-Wan is all about the Force for obvious reasons.
Right.
And I think it kind of, I don't know, like the characters in general are just way more well written than they had any right to be. And I think, I don't know, I just rewatching it, God, yeah, Han Solo stood out as phenomenal. Harrison Ford, great actor. I mean, they're all great actors, right? Like they're all so good. But yeah,
like even in 2, like the contrast, it's the same contrast when you see Han Solo, right, talking about how he just doesn't believe in the Force with Obi-Wan. Grand Moff Tarkin has the same reaction to Darth Vader in the Death Star, where he just calls Vader's Force tricks, it's a stupid religion. And
well, that's not Grand Moff Tarkin though. I thought that was the other guy.
Oh no,
right.
That was the Admiral.
Yeah. Grand Moff Tarkin does kind of. I think he stays kind of neutral, like agnostic to it, right? Like because I think at this point he's like third in command. Like him and Vader are kind of at the same level, right? That's why he can kind of tell Vader what to do on the Death Star. But like I think Grand Moff Tarkin might know a little bit. I haven't seen Clone Wars, but he might know a little bit more about the Force than like that random guy that gets Force choked.
Right. It's like you finally get up to the ranks and you're like, man, I made it here. Let me go talk my stuff. And then next thing you know, Darth Vader's killing you out in front of everyone.
Yeah, Grand Moff Tarkin is definitely, he's not the guy. He's too smart to bite the hand that feeds him. You know what I mean? But also, it's like if someone was dressed like Darth Vader, why would you talk crap to them? No, thank you.
Right, it's like that's the cool thing too, right? Because this is essentially partly World War II in space, right? See the Empire, which I think is an allusion to, the Axis powers in World War II. I love that. Obviously, Darth Vader is now cool for like super, like a lot of super big reasons, right? Not just the whole I'm gonna be the carry out, but carry out of all the bad stuff that the Empire does. But I mean, he's a fantastic villain in this movie, as if we didn't like already know that. Like me rewatching this film, like you get his motivation. It's clear like what he wants from the onset. He's there to do the Empire's dirty work. He's I mean, he's a force to be reckoned with. Like, you don't want to mess around with this guy. And I mean, we saw that like first 3-4 minutes of the movie, he's getting all these rebels out, he's choking them to death, and it's like, all right, this is something I don't want to be messing with. And I mean, it's just the start of arguably the greatest cinematic villain in history.
Oh yeah, definitely arguable for sure. There's someone might argue with us, right? But I think that if someone was like, "Oh, who's your favorite movie villain in all of cinema?" and you said Darth Vader, I think most people would be like, "Okay, that's a good." Yeah. It's not like you're saying something like, I don't know, super random. I can't even think of a random character right now, but yeah, it's funny you say, because I agree. Like the visual of the Empire is definitely inspired by like World War II sort of, like the Nazis, right? Like visually they're called the Stormtroopers. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like this is very much grabbed from like history, but the plot, which is interesting, is I think George Lucas has actually directly compared it to the Vietnam era war, when you think about it, because the rebels are like guerrilla fighters, right? Like they kind of do, they have to do hit and runs because how else would you fight this massive empire? And I think I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if this is George Lucas retconning his own stuff because he loves to
He
do
does
that.
love to do that.
Yeah, but plot wise, or sort of like they're like visually, I agree. World War II sort of like they grab names and words and the way it looks, but I think plot wise, it kind of marries. I'm using the word marriage again in this episode, not twice, but sort of the Vietnam War and the World War II aesthetics, and I think it's done really well. But yeah, like I obviously inspired by real world events. So, but yeah, I think that's good sci-fi though. Like good science fiction is gonna, you'll see some of the
It
real
always
world.
has good parallels, and obviously Star Wars is not immune to that, whether they're good parallels or bad parallels, like we see with George Lucas trying to make something out of the uh, post 9/11 Iraqi War America, but that's a different story for a different time. But yeah, I mean, I love Darth Vader. I love Grand Moff Tarkin. I also love Obi-Wan Kenobi in this movie as sort of the perfect mentor character for Luke Skywalker, and sort of like the guide that we're sort of along with, like to tag along to fill us in on what's happening all around us. Because obviously in every great movie you need a character like that, especially when you have a bunch of slugs and aliens and different creatures. You need not only a point of view character like Luke, but someone to hopefully explain to that point of view character that, oh, this is what's going on. And I mean, Obi-Wan is, yeah, like you said, like these characters are better written than they had every right to be, and that also includes Obi-Wan, because he could have just been another one-off of the mentor dies sort of cliche type of character, but he doesn't end up falling flat in this movie at all.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And like something that was interesting to me because I have a greater appreciation for it now is his acting, right? Like Obi-Wan, and so obviously, like we're watching this in retrospect. Like we've seen all the Star Wars movies, we've seen, and you've seen Clone Wars, and so you even know a little bit more of like the character work for Obi-Wan than I do. But I think it's really interesting that like seeing that it does seem like there are things that Obi-Wan is hiding from Luke, because a lot of a lot of people will say like who knows, like if George Lucas had the original trilogy planned, who knew blah 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 about this. But there are definitely parts in this film where when Obi-Wan says that Vader was a pupil of his until he turned to evil and then he betrayed and murdered Luke's father, like it looks like he's not telling the full truth. Like the facial expression that he's making is like, I'm going to tell Luke this bit of information, but not the full truth because maybe he's not ready for that. And so obviously, but like the character, I mean, the actor that plays him, Alec Guinness, is he was a well known actor before Star Wars. I think there were some stories about him not even wanting to do Star Wars because he thought it was going to be like a flop. But then, obviously, it's like the thing that he's most well known for now. Um, but yeah, like I thought that was really cool. So I'm wondering at this point, it kind of made me think like, did George Luke like it legitimately seems like George Lucas didn't just fumble into like making this great story, because a lot of his credibility was kind of, I would say, just lowered a lot after the prequel trilogy came out, because people were like, what the heck? Like, who was the genius behind Star Wars? And it's like, George Lucas was, he's just not, he's awful at writing dialogue. But that's not a problem in this movie because the dialogue is awesome. Like, and I think one of the things I didn't realize is how quippy the characters are. Like they talk smack to each other, they are sarcastic to each other, and they make jokes and stuff like that. But it doesn't like stand out like a sore thumb. Like it fits,
Yeah.
and it makes sense for the characters to say that.
Like it always comes along as like, that's something that I can genuinely laugh at. It's not like the Marvel Cinematic Universe equivalent type of dialogue where you're just like, did that joke need to be there? It didn't need to be there. But like I remember the scene where Han Solo is talking to one of the stormtroopers just to make sure everything is okay up in the holding cells, and he's just like, yeah, we're getting everything set here, you don't need to help us, and the stormtrooper's like, what's your clearance number, who are you, who is this? and he's like, then he just shoots this, but I'm laughing, like, it doesn't feel out of place. It always makes sense in line with everything, and I think that's the type of humor you want in a movie. It's enough where, yeah, you want to keep your audience engaged, but, you know, this isn't a comedy. Like, this is a war fought in space, but it fit, like, it's charismatic when it needs to be.
Absolutely. And the man, you missed my favorite line from that interaction when, like, not maybe not my favorite line, but when, because I like how Han or Harrison Ford delivers the lines like, "We're fine, we're okay. How are you?" And then the guy's like, "Who is this? What's your operating norm?" And then he shoots the panel, and then Han's just like, "It's a boring conversation, anyways." And then he yells down the hallway to Luke, because that's fantastic, man. But like, contrast this with the newer Star Wars film. I don't even remember which one it was, but Poe, I believe it's Poe, is making like a "your mama" joke in one of them or something like. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
The first.
It's awful. What are we doing? And like,
it's not going to age well either, because that is clearly humor made in that year, right, when those were super big.
Bro, that's after "your mama" jokes. Where I remember watching "Yo Mama" on MTV or whatever it was. You know what I'm saying? And that was a decade at least before they made it in Star Wars, but also in episode 7 when you know, they unmask Poe, and it's I'm forgetting the Kylo Ren. It's Kylo Ren, and he's just staring at Poe, and then Poe's like, "Who talks first? I talk first? You talk first?" And it's like, what? Like, that is not something that like a real person would do. That's not how they would act, you know?
Especially if they had a lightsaber that Kylo Ren has, and you're twirling it right in front of you.
Yeah, and I just, you know, like, because I imagine, like, if Han was in that situation, he would probably say something quippy, but it's not going to be like, even if it was quippy, it would be something like, he'd probably just do a sigh or something like that. Right. You know, it wouldn't be like, "Who talks first? I talk first. You talk first." Like, it's not, because that's not how anyone would really act. Right. But yeah.
But that's actually something I appreciate with Leia Organa in this movie, right? Like, she's another fantastic character that I did, again, like, watching these is like, man, like, well, first off, like, in that time, right, because you usually didn't have a lot of great solo or strong female-led representation back in the 70s, because that just wasn't a thing. So it was super cool to see, like, oh wow, this is a pretty strong female protagonist that's in this movie. But also, the way that, like, she handles herself amongst the rest of the Empire leaders, whoever talks to her, whether it's Tarkin, whether it's Vader, you always get the sense of, like, she knows what she's doing. It feels like she knows how to handle herself in those situations, and also that she can hold on her own without anyone tethering themselves to her, which is why I love Leia as a character.
Yeah, this might be TMI, but when Carrie Fisher died, I cried. Like, when I heard the news about Carrie Fisher dying, I remember where I was. I remember being in my car, and then, like, kind of like at a red light, and then I was on Reddit and I saw the news, and I was just like, "Oh, this is awful. Like, this is what a horrible, like, part of my, you know what I mean? Like, this sucks." Like, obviously I'll never forget that. But yeah, like, I agree. And this goes back to the storytelling part. Remember, the show don't tell. Like, Leia, as soon as she sees Grand Moff Tarkin, she's like, "Grand Moff Tarkin, I should have recognized your foul stunts as soon as I was brought on board." He says, "I should have expected you were holding Vader's leash," because this shows a couple of things. One, that Leia does like to talk smack, right? Like, she is not afraid to stand her ground against very intimidating, very powerful people. Two, it lets us know that she is obviously very politically involved, because, like, she knows who these people are. Like, you know what I mean? It's not just like, "Oh, who is this?" And then, like, Grand Moff Tarkin has this weird sort of, like, exposition villain monologue type thing. It's like, "Oh, this is a dialogue. She's talking crap. Grand Moff Tarkin isn't having any of it, and he's about to blow her planet up." And so, I don't know. Yeah, Leia is obviously fantastic. Love Carrie Fisher. I think they're, like, you know, it obviously, like, George Lucas has a thing for, like, visuals and stuff, and the way that he wants women to look, but at least I think she's, like, well written, you know. And I think that's really cool because, like you said, in the 70s, yeah, that wasn't, that wasn't happening. And, obviously, like I mean, Princess Leia is an icon, like cultural phenomenon icon. It doesn't get much more impactful than I think Princess Leia. But yeah, so I agree. And I think she's pretty consistent. I mean, she's super consistent throughout the entire film too. She doesn't have like a dramatic character arc like Han does, or Luke does, but like her character feels good. If her character feels legit, if she feels like a leader, she feels like someone, like a real person placed into this situation of this fantasy universe. So but I can say that about every character in this film because, again, it's so well written and the actors are phenomenal. So
Yeah, speaking of actors, like Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker is, I mean, doesn't need to be said, but I think it has to be because he is the star of this film. He is arguably the greatest character in Star Wars or even in cinematic history, right? You're talking about this boy who is locked into this intergalactic conflict because his aunt and uncle bought two droids that just happened to be part of the rebellion, and we get sucked in. But man, like, all of the acting that he does, like, there's no falter in, like, obviously, yeah, it's Mark Hamill, but man, like, what an awesome character, and what a way to, like, just, like, introduce us to his life and the way everything surrounds him and his situations. Again, as if it needed to be said, but obviously it has to be.
yeah, I love Mark Hamill. I was surprised with how impressed I was by his acting. Because again, as a kid, I don't, you know what I mean. I'm just watching the film. Like it's cool. It's cool stuff happening. But as an adult, and I coach speech and debate. Obviously, you're on the team. You know that. But one of the things that I did was like I did the acting event. And so I have like I coach that event sometimes too. And when I judge it, I'm like, oh man, like the character you're playing isn't believable. But Mark Hamill is very believable. He's very much a good actor, which in his like first big film. And he's in some other stuff before this, but he's still he was like a lesser known actor before. And I was surprised with just how well done his Luke Skywalker is. Not because I don't think he's a good actor. It's just because I was like, oh man, like the original Star Wars movie, it's not just because I was kind of like hoping that it wasn't just nostalgia that made me love this film. And I think we've talked about the plot, we talked about other characters, but yeah, like especially watching Mark Hamill like as Luke Skywalker, he is a very deserving actor to be the protagonist of one of the most famous film franchises of all time. So yeah, I can't commend him enough.
as per usual. And yeah, I mean, just again, a long list of characters that, including C-3PO and R2-D2. I know that these are stupid droids, and C-3PO tends to get himself into flux situations, but they're not one-dimensional at all. Like, you also understand like what they're doing. You got C-3PO as a comedic relief, and R2 is just sort of like this hanging buddy. They both get into situations. But again, it's never forced or enthralled in anything. It's like sometimes when you have like these weird side missions in a movie, they tend to draw away from the plot. But they're also heavily interconnected. They make sense, and they bring a sort of levity to the movie, right? That some of the other characters don't, because you're just stuck in this intergalactic conflict. But we get to see these two and how they handle themselves and interact with everyone else, and it's a nice breath of fresh air to have.
Yeah, and they're really like the droids are really who we're seeing we are following them through the movie for the first like 20 minutes, Like we don't even see Luke until like I think it's like 20 minutes into the film. And again, this just goes back to though like not a single minute is wasted. And like droids that have no facial expressions. It's all beeps from R2D2 and quippy comments and stiff movements from C3PO, but they are enough to like hold the audience's attention because I mean, what we would say is the voice actors or the voice actor for C3PO and whoever's controlling the board for R2D2 for his beeps and stuff are just it's just so well done. And the dialogue, or I guess like what would be considered the dialogue between C3PO and talking to R2D2, seems real. Again, like it's not like, oh, what's that, Lassie? There's a boy stuck in the well. We better go get him. You know what I mean? Like we can infer what R2D2 is saying based on 3PO's reaction or based on his comment to it. And if we can't infer directly, we get a general idea, and that's enough to keep the story going. So yeah, again, and I guess the same thing is, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but the same thing is very similar to Chewbacca, right? Like we don't understand what Chewbacca's saying, but like through Han's reactions to Chewbacca and what Han says to Chewbacca, we kind of get an idea of what is going on, what they're talking about, or what comment Chewie or R2D2 made, just based on like what other characters say. And I think that's really cool. Something I really appreciate.
100%. And I mean, there's also a lot of scenes and moments in this movie that I also appreciate too, like good ones, funny ones, sad ones. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite scene in the movie? I mean, there's a billion that I know you can choose from, but do you have one or two that stick out to you the most?
Oh man, you might have hit me with a hard one, because I think, man, I love the introduction of Han Solo, that cantina scene, like the whole cantina scene itself, but especially when we see Han, Luke, Chewie, and Obi-Wan sitting at the, the table or whatever, and also obviously up until Greedo dies. Like I love that scene. That might be one of my favorites. Another scene is, they're so good, dude. Like they're so good. Like when we first see Darth Vader use force choke on that guy, like I love that scene. But I also love the end scene when Luke finally blows up the Death Star. And I think that's like Luke's character arc, right? Like he goes from actually believing into the force and trusting the force, and that's why he turns off his targeting computer, and he's rewarded for it, or at least he's able to complete the task because of it. And so I do love that scene too. Because it just lends a little bit more credibility to the Force, because even though Luke's the protagonist, we never see him actually fight with the lightsaber. We never see him do what we would consider Jedi to do, right? We see him training, but the only Jedi things we actually see are all from Obi-Wan. So I think that like the ending of Star Wars sets up the sequel very nicely, like perfectly almost. So I don't know. It's tough to say a favorite scene. I don't know. What about you? What do you think your favorite scene is?
I've got two or three that I'm thinking of mine, and all the ones that you've mentioned, they're all phenomenal. I love the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, just as sort of this emotional gut punch between just the both of those to see like where these two have come from. It's interesting too, because you don't need all that backstory to see like how these two are fighting or why they're involved. You get the sense of like there's beef here between these two. Nothing is completely and fully explained because Obi-Wan has purposefully left both the audience and the characters involved that are along with him in like a loophole. But you get the sense of like why these two are fighting. You get, and it's without like all the choreography, which is cool, right? Like you see the prequel trilogy, even like some of the sequels, like cool, like yeah, there's some nice lightsaber scenes in there, but you understand like the emotional depth like these two characters are bringing, and even like when when Luke's looking at Obi-Wan and Darth Vader before Darth Vader strikes him down, it's like, man, like it feels like you lost someone in that moment. So that's what makes that scene special for me. And for a lot of people, I think it's the binary sunset, right? The whole Luke looking at the onset of what's this next adventure going to be like for me, and sort of like these two worlds colliding in, and just the way that the camera pans too. Like the way that Mark Hamill is acting throughout, like phenomenal. And then the scene where like Luke looks at his burnt down home and realizes that there's nothing left for him to do on Tatooine, and just the distraught and the disappointment and the sadness that's on him. Like those are obviously, I could point out the whole movie because the entire movie has a bunch of amazing scenes, but it's those emotional ones for me that stick out, just because I don't mind like gut punches. When gut punches work, I mean, I get anxious, but man, like they do hit you like a train.
Yeah, those scenes, I mean, those scenes are, like you said, you can't go wrong, right, with choosing a favorite scene. But those scenes, I agree, are just excellent. I think, I mean, there's some added level to it, obviously, with all the context we have, especially when Empire Strikes Back comes out and Return of the Jedi comes out. It almost adds to Star Wars instead of taking away from it. And I think even in the Obi-Wan scene, or the lightsaber scene that you're talking about, it almost seems like the audience should know, based on episodes 5 and 6, that Darth Vader was probably holding back in that fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, there are limitations based on like the budget, based on all this stuff that we can say, but like, I mean, with us, and I'm giving George Lucas the benefit of the doubt here and saying that he had, he probably planned out 3 movies, a trilogy in advance. But with that information, it definitely seems like Darth Vader was probably holding back, probably could have killed Obi-Wan, even if Obi-Wan didn't give himself up towards the end. And I think it kind of, like you said, showcases some of the history, some of the vitriol behind from Vader to Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan doesn't hate him. That's not the Jedi way, but Darth Vader, he has to hate him. And obviously we have all this context beforehand now. We have the prequel trilogy, Clone Wars, all this stuff. Like, Darth Vader has to hate Obi-Wan. Otherwise, none of his like current life even makes sense. But yeah. And by the way, the scene where he goes back and sees his aunt and uncle like burnt to smithereens, something that I forgot to mention is, like, I was surprised with how, like, there are like scary moments in Star Wars. One of the first ones that I remember is the Tusken Raider sort of jump scare.
Yeah.
When he's like, oh, where is it? And then all of a sudden he's right in front of him. It's like, and then there's the seeing his family burnt to crisp, which is something that you might see out of a horror film. And because it's very graphic, it doesn't hide it at all. And it, maybe they do that to showcase the sort of brutality of the Empire, which works really well, obviously. And then there's also the scene in the garbage chute where there's that weird, still don't understand why the hell that monster's in the garbage chute. But it's weird and creepy, right? It's this weird tentacle monster with this eye thing that pops up like this. And so there's like legitimately like kind of scary horror type things. Obviously, when Obi-Wan cuts off the dude's hand in the cantina, like, that's also graphic.
And the Leia scene, right, in the when she gets interrogated with the weird probe droid.
Yeah,
I don't expect I remember seeing that or expecting that, but it went in there anyways.
Yeah, that I remember that, actually, when I was a kid. Of all the scenes I just listed, the interrogation thing that you mentioned, that was the thing that kind of like weirded me out, or like scared me the most. I remember thinking that thing is weird, and they never show. Actually, I don't remember.
They don't show. The door closes.
Yeah, right. And you see the look on Leia's face, and she's horrified. Did they show in episode 5 in Empire Strikes Back? Because they also do the same thing with Han, Lando Calrissian.
Oh, Lando, yeah.
Or is it? Yeah. Like, or no. You're right.
Han.
It is with Han. Yeah, but Lando's the one who gives him up. Okay. I don't remember if they show.
Yeah, they showed some sparks flying in that room. I do remember, yeah.
It's like a torture scene, and so, but like it, I don't know. I do remember those things being like the weirdest, sort of creepiest thing from like my childhood self. But
I guess it's like kind of weird too, because you got Princess Leia, right, who is Darth Vader's daughter, and like, I think him even half knowingly, like, yeah, I gotta torture my own kindred. Just for the specific sake of, we need the information out to destroy the rebel base.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because, yeah, I would assume that Vader does know that Leia is his daughter. He probably doesn't know about Luke yet. I mean, because if we, with the knowledge we have, we assume that Vader doesn't know that his child survives, or that he has children, but like, he probably has some weird connection with Leia. And even in this film, that holds up to the canon, right? Because he tries to keep Leia alive in this film, because Grand Moff Tarkin's like, terminate her, whatever, right? And then like when something happens, I forget what happens, but Darth Vader's like, "Oh, she may have yet be of some use to us," is the exact line
Yep,
that he
yep.
says, and it's under his sort of like influence that Leia isn't executed earlier. So there's definitely some, I would say, some credibility to this film, like the trilogy itself being planned out and the Luke and Leia stuff being planned out and stuff like that. I think a little bit more than what some people may give credit to, because sometimes it's easy to say, "Oh, he just came up with this later because, it was cool or whatever." But like I think that there's some hints of it in this first film.
No, for sure. I'm trying to think of other instances too where, like I know like because the Force works in mysterious ways and whatever, but like I think we also get some of that tingling sense too, like on like both when they're escaping like the Death Star, like right after or as soon as Obi-Wan gets killed, and then even the like when they're about like when Luke's about to destroy the Death Star. I feel like we get a little bit of that, and we don't, obviously it's not fully explored until Empire Strikes Back when we are revealed with all of that information. But I think that's like one cool thing about this movie is that there are seeds planted to where it's a great standalone film, but you get more, or you can do more if you make sequels or other movies that spin off or connect to it afterwards.
Yes. You just reminded me, by the way, of something that I thought was really cool too, where they first escaped from the Death Star, and Han's just like, "Whoo, that was oh, man, we did it," and Luke's like, "Woo, we did it," and then Leia's like, "That was too easy. They're tracking us." Like, and it just again showcases that she's really smart, really insightful, and knows what the hell she's talking about because obviously she was right. Um, but yeah, man, the seeds that were planted to build this universe were amazing. And but like you said, as a standalone film, you can watch this movie, enjoy it for what it is, and it feels complete. You don't feel like there's an unresolved story. You don't feel like any of that stuff. And that's how movies should be made, right? Like they should be made with, I want to tell this story. And of course, like these are, when you're making a movie or writing a movie, ideally you're writing characters that existed before the movie starts and they will exist after the movie starts, of course, unless they die within the film. But this film, I think, does that. Like you have people that have histories, individual histories, all of them. They come together in this plot, in the story, and then afterwards, like we get a general idea of what they're gonna be doing, but it still feels like we saw a complete story.
No, for sure. And I wish that Obi-Wan's story, when he's laying it out to Luke, was maybe a little bit more complete. Because maybe you're in 1977, you don't know what a Clone Wars is, you don't know what an Anakin or whatever your father was, or this and that. But that's also one of my favorite scenes too, where he's looking back on Anakin with this sense of like longing and, man, like he was an awesome friend. He and I did so much together, like as it doesn't feel like it was just like a one-off. It like Obi-Wan's looking back on his time and like with Anakin and reminiscing. And again, when we get to Clone Wars, I really, which again I'm hoping we do at some point, because you get to see their friendship laid out in that TV show. But I love the acting in that scene where you get the sense of like Obi-Wan just wants to see his old friend just sort of present like out again, where he doesn't have to like hide under the Darth Vader cowl, where he could just be turned. And I think that's pretty cool too. Like you get the sense of there's still some good left in that person, even though for the whole movie he's like, I just want to lay out whatever the Empire needs me to do. But I like that foreshadowing of this guy can be turned. It might not be easy, but it can definitely be doable.
Yeah, you see in that scene that you're talking about, you can very clearly tell that Obi-Wan is reminiscing good times. And I think maybe that's the, like, it actually, I think that adds to what one of the reason, like, part of the reasoning behind not telling Luke that, like, Vader is your father, you know? Like, instead of telling, like, because in Obi-Wan's mind, like, there are two different people. There's Anakin and then there's Vader. And I think that, maybe he's thinking that like Anakin is still in there, and not to like, I don't know, hate your father. You know what I mean? Don't, I don't know. Like, you can hate Darth Vader, but don't hate your father type thing, right? Like that. I think that is interesting. Is like viewing them as two different people. And a lot of people do, right? A lot of people do consider them two different people, which makes sense. I can see that. But yeah, I do think that again just adds to it. I don't know. It's like I already mentioned, this had way better writing and acting than it had any right to have, going back to the 70s. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't have much else to
I
say
really
about that.
don't.
Yeah.
But I can't even. I think if there's one thing that I could nitpick about the movie is that maybe they weren't as concrete with the whole Luke and Leia thing as maybe they should have. Because that's pretty, like, that's, I think, the one big criticism with this and Empire, right? But it's like, it's partly minor. It's just like a footnote. I mean, they didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. Yeah, it's incest, but it's
Yeah.
not like they slept together or anything.
Nah, it's just a kiss, which is still weird, but I do think that like there's a I don't know, like there's not like what would be like sexual tension between Luke and Leia
Mm-mm.
ever in
No.
this film. And so I didn't think, like, going back, I was wondering about that. And even at the end ceremony when Leia not crowns, but awards the medal around Luke and then Han, like she gives Luke this, smile, and he smiles back. And then when Han smiles at her, she gives him this look like, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
she wants to like, and so in a way, it doesn't open any, you know what I mean? Like it's very clear that in the sequel, like this could go in either way. And so yeah, like I do think that could be nitpicky, but I don't know, like if we're assuming again, like two people do not know their brother and sister, I think their behavior is totally normal.
Right.
Like there's no reason for them to believe they're brother and sister. They grew up on different planets, completely different backgrounds. They have different names. And so, um, in that context, if we're talking about what do people do, like it's totally normal, and they don't, and Luke doesn't even find out until,
Yeah,
um,
the last episode.
yeah, until the last episode. And that's when they kind of talk about it a little bit. Um, but even then, like, it's like, oh, okay, like, I don't know. They don't make, I think again, you're right to be nitpicky. I think if I had to be nitpicky, the only thing and I remember this from when I was watching it as a kid, but obviously the budget in Empire Strikes Back is way higher.
Always.
In Star Wars, it's much lower. And some of the special effects kind of suffer because of it. Specifically, Darth Vader's costume design.
Mm-hmm.
It looks very, I would say, cheap in this one versus when you watch Empire or Return of the Jedi, or of course any other media that live action Darth Vader appears in. So much so that at a couple points you can see, if you pay attention to Darth Vader's eyes, it looks like almost like brown or red instead of black all the time, like because they should be blacked out, right? You shouldn't ever be able to see through it, but because of some of the lighting on the film set, you can sometimes see a little bit through it with a red tint. And in the end scene when Darth Vader's in the TIE fighter fighting, and I think he spins out of control or whatever, you get it, like you
gotta see
get
it,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, you get to see what I assume is David Prowse's eye through the lens. And this is like me being very, very nitpicky, you know what I mean? Very, like, I would never complain about this ever.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you're only watching Star Wars the original film, you're not going to complain about that at all, because that would make sense. It's not until Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi come out that you realize, oh, you're never supposed to see Vader's face except in that scene where you kind of see the back of his head, and then they take off his mask.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. Like, so yeah, that would be like it.
That would be it. I can't name you one thing that I just hate about, or not even like hate, like just dislike about the movie. Like, everything I dislike about this film was added. It wasn't tuned in. Like, whatever the version we watched is, this is the Star Wars that I love and hope to seek out and enjoy. Like, that's the film's legacy for me, and I think for everyone. I can't even know. I don't even know if I can call the movie boring. Like, these are great characters. this is a great plot, even if it is very, like, yeah, we're gonna destroy a thing, but it's all like you said earlier. It's structured well. It's tight. It's compact. Everything makes sense. The plot moves forward, and it never leaves you hanging or leaving anything to be desired. It's a so wonderful I can't, like, yeah, I'm like, if I had to give it a score, I'd give it a 10 out of 10. Like, that's just how good the movie is.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Star Wars gets a lot of criticism for like, oh, it's good versus evil, but I don't think that it's good versus evil because you have like well-written, nuanced characters in this. Like we've already talked about Han's development, we talked about Luke's, we talked about obviously Vader has character development and stuff like that. But I think that like if you watch Star Wars as a whole, not just the original movie, but if you watch episodes 1 through 9, even though I would recommend not watching a lot of those, like they don't explicitly say that like the Jedi are good or what or infallible or stuff like that. Obviously the Sith are very evil. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It doesn't always come off as a good versus evil thing, especially when you get down to like the characters being complex, because when the characters have nuance to it, it sort of breaks down the good versus evil sort of like veil, right? Because Han is not good or evil in this like first film. Like he is a person living in this universe as a smuggler, someone who lives outside the law, who only looks out for himself and then makes one really selfless decision. And that is like what people do, right? That is who like a real person is. The like people are or they're just a combination of all their decisions and life experiences to that point. And Han does something that is something he's probably never done before. And so yeah, I don't know. I love Star Wars, but I'm still surprised with how much I loved watching this version. But yeah, going back to like the special effects stuff, everything that I dislike about the Star Wars films are added in after. And I was thinking about this when I was watching the film, but I couldn't imagine watching Jaws with like remastered special effects or Jurassic Park with remastered special effects. Because the reason those movies hold up so well is because of the practical effects that are in the film. Like it's, again, man, I know I'll always, talk smack on the remastered editions, but like, it's so weird how, and just to compare two different films or two different film franchises, why does Jurassic Park 1 that came out in like 91 or 93 look better than the Jurassic World movies? But it's because of, lighting, special effects, and they were cheaper to make, you know what I mean? All this good stuff. And I think it's the same thing with like Star Wars, right? Like, the old Star Wars, they look better, and don't add this new crap into it. So
yeah, George Lucas said in an interview, I believe in 1978, that special effects are just a part to help enhance the story, not the other way around. And it's like, wait, you said that? George Lucas said that. Which it feels weird like to see nowadays, because you have a lot of movies nowadays where a movie is just a means for a special effect to tell a story when I love films that have these stories that just use special effects as like a mean to help push the narrative along, instead of it being the complete narrative of like, oh, we got to see like all these different backgrounds and everything else behind like a blue screen where it feels filtered. Because like, you as a human being, you can tell when something feels different or not compared to like what an actual thing is, right? It's like the whole thing of AI art versus real art that people toiled using their hands, whether it's digital or physical. And it's like, we can tell if something looks off. Like, we are like, our brains and our minds were designed to look at stuff that way. And it's kind of disappointing to see that, again, like, newer generations won't be able to witness and feel the actual Star Wars story by means of like none of this stuff. And it's super disappointing, because the movie we watched is perfect. Like, there's nothing needed to be added to it to enhance the film.
I agree. I am thinking, because if anyone watching this or listening to this wants to actually watch the version that we saw, I think something that I can do is I can record a tutorial of how I got it to work. And then if you want, maybe you can upload that as like a side video or something like that, just so that people can experience the way that the original trilogy, the whole trilogy was supposed to be experienced, right? Obviously, you don't get to see it in a big movie theater or something, but these are the like the version that we watched is why Star Wars is as popular as it is now. It is not the ones that came out in on DVD or Blu-ray. It is not Episode 1 Phantom Menace or Revenge of the Sith or any of that. It is these movies that came out in the 70s and 80s. That is why Star Wars is the cultural icon that it is today. And so I would that would take me like less than 10 minutes to record that video. So I can easily do that. And maybe I will do that. I can't commit to it right now, but actually, you know what? Yeah, I can do this in like I said, 10 minutes. I can get this done by today, honestly.
For sure.
But yeah, man, I miss more. I wish more movies were like this. Going to what you were talking about, like the CGI being off, I did like Rogue One, but obviously like Grand Moff Tarkin looks weird.
He looks incredibly weird, like the way that they de-aged stuff. So same with Leia.
Yeah.
And a lot of these like other old, it's like we really need to get like it's part of it too is like nostalgia factor, right? It's like, oh, here you get to see your favorite old character and they look super off.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the wrinkles or lack of them, or it just looks completely different than what you're supposed to be seeing. I completely agree with you there.
Yeah, it's the uncanny valley, right? Like they look real, but for some reason our brain is like, that is not a real person. And you can see like it's, so they call it the uncanny valley for those that might listen to this that haven't heard of this. But yeah, it's like when something for some reason looks real, but something also looks off about it. And it's kind of a scary like phenomena. Like it's like your brain's response is to probably flee from it or something. Like if you saw something like that in real life, you'd probably get scared. But because it's a movie, you're like, oh, this is just really crappy CGI. Or not really crappy, but like, a poor, what I would describe as like a poor choice to use CGI when the technology for what they want to do just isn't there yet. That's just how it is, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, but it is not there right now. And it, in some ways, kind of takes away from it. I mean, I think it takes away from Rogue One. But, we're not talking about Rogue One today, so I won't get too much into that.
Oh, man. Do you have any other last comments on the original Star Wars? I know that we pretty much went almost over everything. I gotta add, James Earl Jones as Darth Vader is like the best thing ever. Forgot to mention that earlier, but like,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I don't know that. I feel like that needs to be said at least once. But again, it's not like we didn't know that. It's just that he's awesome.
Yeah, and I agree. It's weird though. When I was watching the credits, James Earl Jones isn't listed in the credits, or at least I didn't see his name. I kept looking for his name, and it didn't pop up.
I didn't see it either.
Yeah, and so I do know that he does voice Darth Vader, but I remember, I think as a kid when I looked this up, or younger, right, when I looked this up, it wasn't just James Earl Jones, I think it was like kind of an ensemble thing, like different people voiced him at different points. But I do remember hearing about David Prowse being very upset they didn't use his voice because his voice just wasn't menacing, it wasn't. And so
but you needed him to be, especially in the situations that you're in. Like, I get where the actor's coming from, but also if other people are like weirdly doing the job better than you, then I also get that, you might want to change.
Yeah. Okay, so Wikipedia does have James Earl Jones listed as the sole voice of Darth Vader, so maybe I'm wrong there, but yeah, like, agree, like, either way, the combination of David Prowse's body language and James Earl Jones's voice creates a very menacing villain, and like a very like steals the show. You know what I mean? You see this like, because he's designed after like samurai and stuff. You see this like futuristic all black samurai that is just like mysterious and menacing, and you're like, man, that is sick. That is cool. Like, cool factor, turn it to 12. But yeah.
100%. I feel like there's no Yeah, there doesn't feel like a disconnect between both characters, and this is maybe a terrible movie to compare it to, but like, I watched the Shazam films, like both of the Shazam films, like the first one, the second one. I like the first one. Second one was, yeah. But anyways, like you see like two completely different characters when one's in the Shazam outfit and one that's not, but you don't feel any of that disconnect between either the voice actor or the person who's actually in the suit and carrying the actions out.
That's a good comparison. I never thought. Yeah, that's really cool. Like I do, and I agree. I like the first Shazam film. I haven't seen the second one. Yeah, because I saw it's the same thing with, we talked about Marvel last week, but yeah, and it's the same thing, right? Like I heard the reviews were bad, so I was like, I'm not gonna watch it because, I mean, and you know what? I was rewarded for not watching it because they're like resetting the DC
Yep. Yeah.
cinematic universe anyways. So it's like, why would I watch these movies that aren't gonna have any effect? But um yeah, back to the CGI, like the obviously the story thing, but I'm actually gonna send you this meme later that I saw online, where it's weird that the modern Marvel CGI, like especially the what's the big head in
MODOK?
Ant-Man? Yeah, like he just looks, that's like the CGI is so bad. And Star Wars, obviously, or the original film avoids that because the computer generated imaging doesn't really exist then. It's all practical effects and special and like lighting tricks and stuff like that. And man, like it's a huge part. Like there are some, obviously I'm not like anti-technology, but there are parts of cinema that is lost with just doing what would be like the easy route of just making these programmers sit in a freaking room for days and days and days and days to generate one thing that kind of looks like it's real, whereas just building the spaceship itself and using clever film tricks, cinema tricks would be more effective and look better. So
Yeah, that's why I love the Death Star action sequence when they're all on and you're just you actually feel like you're alongside those starfighters. There was X-wings to destroy the Death Star via all the guns and everything else that's slotted in. It doesn't feel like, man, I'm part of, this is like obviously behind a green screen with 250 filmographers and computer animators all sitting behind and trying to render stuff. No, it feels like someone actually shot this, used different tricks in the film, and laid it all out, and it feels natural. It doesn't feel like, like this was obviously like edited in post, or some people in the room coded something and then put it up. No, it actually feels like a human put this together, or a couple humans put this together physically.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that makes the job easier for the people, for the editors, for everything, for everyone, right? Because when you have a physical thing you can look at and be like, oh, this is where the character is standing, and this is where they should be looking, and this is where like the ship is compared to the other ship. So you don't have to be like, okay, everyone, let's look in that general direction. Like you can show them, hey, this is where you would be looking, and then they'll look there or something like that, right? I think that makes it easier for everyone. Also, of course, like lighting, like a lot of people think that it's just generating the images that is really hard, but the really, really, really hard part is the lighting. And a lot of CGI, especially like when you don't have a lot of, like when you're like crunched, because a lot of programmers are crunched, they unfortunately have to work really long hours to get the product done. The lighting ends up looking bad, and that leads to it looking worse. That's why movies like Jurassic World look way worse than a movie that came out 25 years before it, which doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe in a future episode we can generally talk about like the evolution of film or cinema or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about that stuff.
Completely unrelated, and this is only going to take 10 seconds. Apparently, Christian McCaffrey just signed a 2-year extension with the San Francisco 49ers, so that's pretty cool.
Let's go.
But no, I completely agree with you on that. And yeah, I think like closing in, just again, like a wonderful film, and obviously that's obviously something we can cover with the whole evolution of, because I mean, I want to learn about that stuff too. There's a lot about movies that I still have yet to learn, just because I've been exposed to such a small amount compared to you and compared to a lot of other nerds who have been in this longer than me, that like know, oh, like this is this film, this is why it was carried out. But obviously I chose Star Wars last week just because I knew that it would be a good time for the both of us just to like sit down and enjoy an actual film, but also just remind myself of this is what a really, really good film looks like. One with craft and love and care and tenderness. Some movies just feel like, it's like some movies nowadays, not to name any names, but they feel like they're being pumped out by a studio via a factory. If this feels like it was crafted in a home where all the labor and work that was put into it felt like every single minute was productive, no time was wasted. I mean, again, that's why I love Star Wars, and that's why I wanted to cover it this week.
Yeah, it's got soul, man. It's got an individual, like, it's got personality, soul, these things that like we wouldn't generally say about movies, but like, I've mentioned some, so I will mention a name. Earlier, you talked about sometimes a film being made to showcase special effects, not the other way around. And that leads to bad, are films that kind of just like, what's the point of this, right? Like, oh, you just wanted to show this cool effect that you can do. Like, obviously Star Wars was revolutionary for its special effects, but those were just a tool for the story. The story wasn't a tool to showcase special effects, which is where, and I still to this day do not understand the hype of the Avatar movies from James Cameron. I like James Cameron as a director, right? But like, I'm like, why do people care about the Avatar? It's just great special effects. The story itself, I don't know, man. Like
I can go for cool special effects at an amusement park.
Yeah, like I genuinely don't get it. And people are like, oh, it took 10 years to make. I'm like, why does that make it good? It doesn't make it good. That's just a fact. That doesn't make it good or bad. That's just a thing that happened. But so anyways, obviously, maybe one day we'll talk more about the sequels, and I don't know if we would do an individual episode for like each of the prequel trilogy. Certainly not the sequel trilogy. I would not want to do an individual episode for each movie. But those could be, we can cover those trilogies in the future. But I know we got some other things that we want to talk about. So those probably won't be complete. Like those won't be like right after this. I don't know. What are you thinking actually for the future of this podcast? What about episode 3 of Two Californian Filipinos?
Episode 3, I think, because I'm in this weird Harrison Ford kick, just because I watched him he was so awesome in this movie. Obviously, like, he's Harrison Ford. Yes, he is awesome, but I think it's time to enjoy an actual great Steven Spielberg movie that's on Disney Plus. We're gonna go watch some Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I want to experience. See, it's weird for me because like those movies I actually like actively watch as a kid because my dad loves Indiana Jones and he showed it to me. I was like, oh, this is cool. And they got me my parents got me a PlayStation. They got me the Lego Indiana Jones games, and I got a lot of Indiana Jones Lego sets. So I think that's what we'll do. I think that's what we'll do for episode 3 of the series. And people love the last one. Again, we got 8 likes, we got 50 views, which is honestly pretty good for being where I'm at with the subscriber count. So this is definitely, I think, going to continue, and I think I'm down for it. Are you down for it?
Yeah, no, I've seen all the Indiana Jones films except for the new one, the 5th one. You know what I mean? I haven't seen that one. Yeah. But yeah, so I didn't see that one, but I have seen the originals. I was gonna ask, are the originals, are they altered are the ones on Disney Plus, are they altered in any way? No. They're not? Okay, that's awesome. So I don't have to do some weird download thing that we had to do. Which, you know what? I'm gonna make a note right now to make sure that I record that video, just to like have it and post it somewhere. Okay, let me tutorial for Star Wars is all I'm putting. Star Wars. I'll put SW. But yeah, and so yeah, that sounds excellent. I think that'll be, I don't know, I assume it'd be kind of similar to this because obviously Indiana Jones Raiders of Lost Ark is a classic.
It is a very much,
and yeah, it's Harrison Ford, man. He's obviously playing a very similar character to Han Solo, but Yeah, man. I remember seeing, I think it was like Temple of Doom,
Hmm.
and like as a kid and being like scared.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, there's that scene where he like rips the dude's heart out. You know what I mean? But
for sure, for sure. And yeah, we'll have a lot to cover in next week. But thank you once again all for listening to us ramble about Star Wars for 1.5 hours. If you've made this far, I know again we got a couple of listeners in, and be sure to tell us in the comments section if you want to see us cover anything. Doesn't even have to be film either. Like again, we made this podcast specifically for this, like in name like this, so that we don't just have to cover films. We can cover whatever you want. If you want us to cover a specific topic, I'm down to do that. It doesn't have to be pop culture either. Again, just let us know in the comments section, and I will get to that. But till then, again, I am Domovex. He is Drew Morgan. You can find me on social medias at Domovex Studio, again, or on this very YouTube channel that I'm on. And stay safe, you be you, and have a great rest of the day or week, wherever you are.
yeah, thank you very much, folks. And if you have anything you disagree with as well, please hit us up. But yeah, hey Dom, a pleasure again. Can't wait for the next one, and see y'all later.